names. My name is Sheila Ugetti. I'm on the governing board in Gilbert Public Schools, of Gilbert Public Schools. Prior to that, I was an elementary principal and an elementary school teacher. And this is probably one of my many all-time favorite books. It's called The Language of Doves. It's by Rosemary Wells, and the pictures are by Greg Shedd. And I'm going to start by reading to you the author's note because I think it's important. For thousands of years, people have used homing pigeons or doves to send messages through the air. The First World War, in particular, abounds with stories of pigeon heroism. Nearly invisible to enemy soldiers, the birds were faithful carriers of tiny coded messages which alerted troops to any number of emergencies or secrets. Feathered heroes and heroines saved the lives of soldiers and sailors on both sides. The birds were given medals of honor and all the highest military decorations a country could bestow. They are remembered to this day by the armed services of the many nations whose young men fought in this terrible war. And the First World War was over 100 years ago, so they didn't have the technology that we have today in order to get messages sent. So that's why they used the pigeons. I can see us now, Grandfather and I, sitting on his Brooklyn rooftop. It is my 6th birthday. We are waiting for his doves to come home from Cape May, New Jersey. They were taken there by truck this morning with other flocks of racing pigeons. My grandfather watches the sky. I have always spoken the language of doves, Julieta, he likes to say. Grandfather names the doves for the great operas, Marcelina, Ottavio, Elvira, Alfredo. Before I could speak, I knew those names. Today, Grandfather has given me a birthday dove, too young to fly with the others. She is a rosy gray color layered with cocoa brown. It is a feather color known as Isabella, Grandfather tells me. So that is what I will call her, I say. Grandfather frowns at the edge of the Brooklyn sky where he says it links up with the New Jersey sky. I will tell you about another Isabella, he tells me, in Italy, long ago and far away. So on my 6th birthday, I hear this story for the very first time. I had no mother or father. I was raised in a monastery by the Franciscan brothers with other orphan boys. I did not like to fight, so I stayed by myself in the roof garden. This garden had olive and fig trees and a statue of St. Francis, hundreds of years old. There was a dovecote there, under the red tile eaves where it was open to the mountain breeze. When I was 6 like you, Julieta, I learned to care for the birds. I began to speak their language. When I was 7, I was put in charge of the flock. There were 80 birds. I knew them all by name, but my favorite was a female the color of rain clouds. Of course, I named her Isabella. The brothers called her Madrina, which means godmother. She was exactly that to me, only more. In the summer, the brothers sent me into the mountain forest to collect mushrooms. Growing along deer paths under certain trees were the most delicious parasols and morelli. Isabella, always on my shoulder, waited for me to write tiny messages telling the cook what I had found. I wrapped the papers around her leg and sent her flying back so the cook would know what to prepare for dinner that night. I thought this quiet life would last forever, but one day the Great War began. Soon after, the army came to the monastery. They took the biggest boys and all of the doves. Without my Isabella, I went into a spell of grieving and did not eat for 7 days. But luckily for me, 2 soldiers returned. They asked for the boy in the charge of the doves, since the sergeant could do nothing with them. This was how, at 9 years old, I was drafted into the army. No one could tell me why the Italians were fighting the Austrians in the Alps. I didn't care because I was well away from all of the fighting and my doves and I were warm with plenty to eat. One day, 2 lieutenants stopped at my captain's tent. They wanted 3 doves to take into battle. They chose 2 of my strongest males, Bruno and Alberto. Then they picked Isabella. I pleaded and I cried and I told them that she was untrained and that she had a bad heart, but they said her color would be invisible to the enemy soldiers, so they took her. I did not know what happened there in the mountains until much later, when the soldiers who came back told me what they saw. The first 3 days of battle, 200 soldiers were lost. When this happened, a message was put on Bruno's leg asking for help, telling where our army was hiding. But Bruno was shot down by the Austrians, and his message was intercepted. In the next week, many more soldiers were lost. When this happened, Alberto was sent with another message asking for help, but the Austrians had hawks trained to seek out the pigeons. Alberto must have been snapped up in midair because he and his message were never found. When there were only a dozen men left, Isabella was lofted into the air. An Austrian marksman shot her as she rested in a pine tree. She fell to the ground, stunned and bleeding. The marksman fired again. I did not know any of this at the time. I was waiting in camp, thinking only of my 3 gentle friends. In the place my heart usually beat was a hollow where the cold wind howled. Through the night, I strained to hear the soft flutter of Isabella's wings. In my 9 years in the world, I had known only the love of this small, cloud-colored bird. "12 days passed like 12 months. Isabella did not come. I thought I would grow to be an old man who gazed upward in the skies my whole lifetime in case one day I would find her, or she would find me. Then, just at sunset, I spotted what I thought was a rat crossing the mud near my tent. But it was not a rat. It was Isabella walking toward me, wings dragging uselessly. She was nearly dead. The message giving our soldier's location was still attached to her leg. Because of her bravery, 8 men lived. I cleaned her and fed her and repaired her hurt wings. Then I kept her deep inside my tunic so that she would heal and no one would ever take her away from me again." Isabella sat comfortably on my shoulders for the rest of her years, Grandfather tells me. But you know, she is a famous dove. At the end of the war, the Italian High Command awarded her a silver medal on a purple ribbon. Grandfather pulls out his wallet and shows me an old photograph so light and brown, I can hardly find the little bird, but she is there on the shoulders of a thin, smiling boy. My Isabella comes home with me on the subway to Forest Hills in Queens. I carry her in a small box with chicken wire windows. Every Monday morning, just before school, I let Isabella fly. I hope she will return to me, but instead she sails quickly over to Grandfather's loft in Brooklyn. There is no getting her back until my Sunday visit with Grandfather. "How does she know the way?" I ask Grandfather. "Some people say doves memorize church steeples," he tells me. "Other people say that the magnetic forces on the earth guide them, but I know it is because they smell smells that only birds can detect." After a year, I give up training Isabella to come home to me. In her heart, she is a Brooklyn girl, so when I release her on Monday mornings, it is always with a tiny "I love you" for Grandfather in an aluminum capsule attached to her leg. The Sunday before I turn 9, Grandfather and I have a rooftop birthday party. "Do you think Isabella will ever come home to me, Grandfather?" I ask. "Oh, yes," he answers, "when you've learned the language of doves." A week after my birthday, our telephone rings at dawn. I hear my mother and father cry, and I know my grandfather has died. I stay home from school. I think only of Isabella and our Sundays with grandfather, which have vanished like the sun over the edge of the earth. There is a long service in a Brooklyn church, and then a long lunch in grandfather's home. I cannot listen to people talking or rustling of fancy clothes. I cannot eat a morsel of the 100 dishes my aunts have brought in that day, nor do I want to say hello to the priest. I wander to the rooftop and find the dovecote empty. Clattering down the stairs, I cry to my uncle in a panic, "Where are the doves? Where is my Isabella?" "Sold to a pigeon breeder in Providence, Rhode Island," comes the answer. I cannot sleep that night. My mother tries to soothe me with a story. My father brings me a glass of warm milk. But even they have to go to bed at last, leaving me to gaze into the northern sky. I remember my grandfather's words. In the place my heart usually beat was a hollow where the cold wind howled. I fall asleep at 5, but at 6 there is a scratching at my window. It is Isabella. She has come back to me for the very first time. Probably she tried grandfather's Brooklyn loft first and found it empty. She is tired from her long flight, and I settle her on my pillow. Around her leg is my aluminum message capsule. Grandfather must have missed the last "I love you," I think, as I undo the capsule and unroll the scrap of paper. But it is not my writing at all. It is a message to me in my grandfather's spidery old country hand. Do not listen to a word they tell you. Having learned the language of doves, I have learned also to fly. Watch for me. And of course, Isabella and I always do. Thank you.